Power, throughout the bloody and turbulent history of human civilization, has almost always been measured by the same crude metrics. The strength of a king was weighed by the thousands of boots marching in his infantry, the sharpness of his forged steel, the height of his stone fortresses, and the sheer volume of gold locked within his vaults. From the pharaohs of the Nile to the emperors of Rome, rulers built their legacies on the backs of the oppressed, leaving behind empires that inevitably crumbled into the dust from which they were raised. But hidden deep within the ancient, sacred texts is the chronicle of a kingdom that defied every known law of physics, warfare, and human limitation. It was an empire not built entirely by human hands, and its dominion extended far beyond the borders of men. It was a kingdom where the unseen world was dragged into the light, where the elements of the earth bowed in submission, and where the impossible became the daily reality. This is the epic saga of the greatest kingdom to ever exist on the face of the earth, the dominion of Solomon, the son of David. Peace be upon them both. To understand the unimaginable heights of Solomon's kingdom, we must first look at the foundation upon which it was built. He did not inherit his crown from a fragile lineage of ordinary monarchs. His father was Dawood, a prophet and a warrior king of terrifying prowess and profound spiritual purity. David was a man to whom the Creator had granted miracles of a physical and emotional magnitude. It was said that when David chanted his psalms, his voice was so hauntingly beautiful that the birds hovering in the sky would freeze in midair to listen, and the towering mountains would echo his praises back to the heavens. He was a man of iron and tears. The divine had made iron as soft as wax in David's bare hands, allowing him to mold impenetrable armor without the use of a furnace or a hammer. He consolidated the kingdom, defeated the tyrant Goliath, and established a reign of justice. But when the time came for David to leave this temporary world, the heavy, golden crown of prophethood and kingship was passed to his son. Solomon, Sulayman, inherited a stabilized nation, a formidable army, and a legacy of divine favor. Yet, Solomon was not destined merely to walk in the footsteps of his father. He was destined to elevate the kingdom to a dimension of reality that no human eye had ever seen, and no human mind could have ever conceived. Even as a young boy, Solomon possessed an intellect that was startling in its clarity. He demonstrated a profound understanding of justice and equity that often surpassed the wisdom of the most seasoned elders in his father's court. But Solomon knew that earthly wisdom and human armies were not enough to establish the absolute, perfect dominion of the Creator on earth. He realized that the human lifespan is short, and human capabilities are terribly limited. And so, in the quiet solitude of his sanctuary, Solomon raised his hands and made a prayer that was so audacious, so unimaginably grand, that it would alter the very fabric of history. He did not ask for long life. He did not ask for the destruction of his enemies. He did not ask for rivers of gold. The sacred texts record his exact words: "My Lord, forgive me, and grant me a kingdom such as will not belong to anyone after me. Indeed, you are the bestower." Consider the sheer magnitude of this request. He was asking for a monopoly on absolute power, a kingdom so unique, so technologically and supernaturally advanced, that no emperor, no dictator, and no superpower from that day until the end of time could ever replicate it. It was a request that, if made by a man of arrogance, would have been met with divine wrath. But the Creator knew the heart of Solomon. He knew that Solomon did not desire this kingdom out of ego, greed, or a thirst for tyranny. Solomon desired it as a magnificent, undeniable proof of the majesty of the one God. He wanted to build a civilization that would force the world to its knees in awe, not of the king, but of the Creator who empowered the king. And the King of Kings, the bestower of all things, answered the prayer of his servant. The heavens opened, and the divine grants that descended upon Solomon fundamentally altered his relationship with the physical and supernatural universe. The first of these unimaginable miracles was the subjugation of the elements. For all of human history, the wind has been a wild, untamable force of nature. It destroys fleets, levels cities, and bows to no man. But by divine decree, the violent, roaring tempests and the gentle, guiding breezes were placed under the absolute command of Solomon. Imagine the cinematic awe of this reality. Solomon did not need to spend months marching his armies across treacherous deserts or wait for the unpredictable seasons to sail his fleets. The sacred texts reveal that he had a massive platform, perhaps made of intricately carved wood and gleaming metal. Upon this colossal structure, he would assemble his elite guard, his scholars, his heavy cavalry, and his immense pavilions. When he was ready to depart, he did not issue a command to his generals. He issued a command to the atmosphere itself. With a single word, the wind would gather beneath the vast platform. The air pressure would shift, a low, powerful hum would vibrate through the earth, and then the impossible would happen. The entire assembly, weighing thousands of tons, would silently and smoothly lift into the sky. The wind, acting as an invisible, intelligent beast of burden, would carry the king and his forces through the clouds. The speed of this travel defies ancient comprehension. A journey that would take an ordinary caravan a full, exhausting month of marching was covered by Solomon in a single morning, and a return journey of another month was completed in a single afternoon. He looked down upon the earth like an eagle, watching the shifting landscapes, the sprawling oceans and the tiny crawling civilizations of men below. He bypassed borders, mountains and impenetrable forests, projecting his power and divine justice to the farthest corners of the earth at the speed of the wind. But the mastery of the skies was only the beginning. As he traveled across his vast dominion, Solomon realized that humanity shares this planet with billions of other sentient beings, creatures that live, breathe, organize, and communicate in a frequency entirely ignored by the arrogant ears of men. The Creator granted Solomon the ultimate key to the natural world, the language of the birds, the beasts, and the insects. This was not a vague, emotional intuition. It was a precise, linguistic comprehension. When Solomon walked through a forest or stood in a valley, the chaotic cacophony of chirps, growls, and buzzing transformed into a coherent symphony of intelligent communication. He could hear the desperate warnings of the prey, the calculated strategies of the predators, and the complex reports of the birds soaring high above. This unprecedented ability allowed Solomon to integrate the animal kingdom into his empire. The birds of the sky were not merely aesthetic creatures of the air, they became the most advanced intelligence and reconnaissance network in the history of warfare. They would fly ahead of his armies, mapping the terrain, locating hidden water sources in the barren deserts, and spying on the movements of rival nations. When Solomon sat on his magnificent throne, the canopy above him was not made of woven silk. It was formed by thousands of birds, flying in perfect, synchronized formation, interlocking their wings to provide the king with shade from the blistering sun. Yet, with all this overwhelming godlike power, flying on the invisible currents of the wind, commanding the beasts of the earth, and ruling the greatest empire of his time, Solomon never allowed the venom of arrogance to poison his heart. His absolute power was perfectly balanced by his absolute humility, a fact beautifully illustrated in one of the most famous and profound encounters recorded in his epic life. The event took place during one of his massive military expeditions. Solomon was marching with an army that defied description. It was not composed solely of human infantry and cavalry. It was a combined, multidimensional force. Ranks of heavily armored men marched alongside invisible battalions of supernatural Jinn, while the sky was darkened by an organized canopy of birds. The ground shook beneath the collective weight of this terrifying, unstoppable juggernaut. As the colossal army approached a certain valley, the heavy boots of the soldiers, the hooves of the war horses, and the rumbling of the supply chariots created a deafening roar. In the direct path of this advancing apocalypse lay a vast, subterranean colony of ants. To the soldiers, the ants were invisible, insignificant specks of dust, not even worth a second glance. But deep within the grass, the leader of the ant colony sensed the vibrations of the approaching doom. Looking up at the terrifying, towering figures of the soldiers and the beasts, the ant recognized the imminent destruction of her people. In a desperate act of leadership, she broadcast an emergency warning to her entire colony. The sacred text immortalizes her tiny, frantic voice. "O ants, enter your dwellings, lest Solomon and his soldiers crush you while they perceive it not." It was a microscopic frequency, a sound completely lost in the thundering roar of 100,000 marching men. No human ear could have possibly detected it. But Solomon was no ordinary human. Riding at the vanguard of his colossal army, the king of the earth heard the tiny, desperate voice of the ant clearly in his mind. He heard her fear, her urgent command, and most profoundly, her recognition that Solomon and his men would not crush them out of malice, but out of ignorance, while they perceive it not. How would an ordinary emperor react? A pharaoh or a Caesar would not have even known the ants existed, and if they did, they would have marched right over them without a second thought. Why should the march of an empire be halted for an insect? But Solomon's reaction is a masterclass in divine leadership. When he heard the ants' warning, he did not ignore it. He did not boast to his generals about his incredible hearing. Instead, the great king pulled back the reins of his majestic warhorse, bringing the entire earth-shaking army to a sudden, grinding halt. He looked down at the tiny, fragile creatures scrambling to safety in the dirt. And then, the commander of the winds, the master of the beasts, and the ruler of the greatest army on earth, simply smiled. His smile broadened into a gentle laugh. It was a laugh of profound, overwhelming humility. In that moment, looking at the tiny ant, he recognized the sheer absurdity of human arrogance. He realized that despite his massive army and his flying throne, he was nothing but a servant, granted these abilities by a power infinitely greater than himself. He raised his hands to the sky, right there in the middle of the valley, and poured out his heart in gratitude. He prayed, "My Lord, enable me to be grateful for your favor which you have bestowed upon me and upon my parents, and to do righteousness of which you approve. And admit me by your mercy into the ranks of your righteous servants." He halted an empire to save an anthill. This was the true strength of Solomon. He possessed a heart that was soft enough to hear the plea of an insect, yet strong enough to bear the weight of a supernatural kingdom. But the mastery over the wind and the comprehension of the animals were only the outer layers of the dominion he had been granted. As the army safely bypassed the Valley of the Ants and continued its journey, Solomon prepared to unveil the darkest, most dangerous and most terrifying aspect of his power. The Creator had given him dominion over the creatures of the light, but now, it was time to subjugate the creatures of the fire. The time had come to break the barrier between the dimensions. The time had come to summon the Jinn. For the vast majority of human history, mankind has walked the earth suffering from a profound existential blindness. We build our cities, chart our maps, and declare ourselves the undisputed masters of the world, completely unaware that we are sharing this planet with a civilization that exists just beyond the fragile veil of our perception. They do not build with our stone, they do not speak with our tongues, and they are not bound by the agonizing limitations of our flesh. They are the Jinn, beings created from the scorching, smokeless flame, possessing a terrifying strength, a lifespan that spans millennia, and an intellect that mirrors our own. Because they exist in a different dimensional frequency, they can see us but we cannot see them. This one-sided visibility has always given them a terrifying advantage. Throughout the ages, desperate and foolish men have tried to bridge the gap between these two worlds. Sorcerers, kings, and practitioners of the dark arts have reached into the abyss, offering their own souls and the blood of the innocent in exchange for a fraction of the Jinn's supernatural power. These dark pacts always ended in ruin, for the malevolent among the Jinn, the Shayatin or devils, despise humanity with an ancient, burning arrogance inherited from Iblis himself. They do not serve men, they manipulate them, driving them toward madness and eternal damnation. But the dominion of King Solomon, peace be upon him, was not built on dark magic, secret rituals, or demonic pacts. It was built on the absolute, unyielding decree of the Creator of the heavens and the earth. When Solomon prayed for a kingdom that would never be replicated, the Almighty did not merely give him mastery over the wind and the beasts. He violently tore away the veil between the dimensions. By divine command, the entire hierarchy of the unseen world was dragged into the light and forced to its knees before the throne of a human being. The king of Israel did not negotiate with the demons of the smokeless fire. He enslaved them. Imagine the sheer cinematic terror of this subjugation. Beings of towering ethereal fire, creatures who had roamed the earth freely for thousands of years, causing chaos and viewing humanity as weak, fragile creatures of clay, were suddenly stripped of their autonomy. They were compelled, by a supernatural force they could not resist, to materialize in the physical realm and present themselves at the court of Solomon. The arrogant Shayatin, the warlords of the unseen world, were brought forward in shackles. When they looked upon the human king sitting calmly on his throne, they did not see a sorcerer to be tricked. They saw the inescapable wrath and authority of the divine. If they dared to disobey a single command, if they paused in their labor or harbored a thought of rebellion, a blazing heavenly punishment would strike them down on the spot. Solomon recognized that the physical strength of men was woefully inadequate to build the civilization he envisioned, a civilization meant to stand as a permanent, overwhelming testament to the glory of God. For this, he needed a labor force that did not tire, did not sleep, and could manipulate the raw elements of the earth with superhuman ease. He organized the Jinn into specialized legions, each tasked with impossibly grueling labor. The first and most prominent of these legions were the builders, Albana. The sacred texts describe the architectural marvels constructed by these supernatural laborers. They were commanded to build the great sanctuary, Beit al-Maqdis, in Jerusalem. This was not a structure of ordinary masonry. The Jinn quarried stones so colossal, so unfathomably massive, that modern engineering cranes would shatter trying to lift them. Yet, the Jinn carried these monolithic blocks through the air, carving the mountains themselves into sheer, perfect walls. They built fortresses of dizzying heights and towering arches that seemed to defy the very laws of gravity. Inside the vast courtyards of the king's palaces, the Jinn were ordered to sculpt and forge. They created monumental, awe-inspiring statues. Before such imagery was forbidden in later divine law, lions and eagles of solid gold and bronze that flanked the steps of Solomon's throne, mechanized to move and roar to strike terror into the hearts of visiting emissaries. They carved basins out of solid rock that were as large as small lakes, designed to hold water for the purification of thousands of worshippers. They forged cauldrons of bronze that were so immense, so unimaginably heavy, that they had to be permanently anchored into the earth, looking like metallic craters, used to cook massive feasts that fed entire armies and the poorest citizens of the kingdom. While the Jinn labored under the scorching sun, their pride broken, carrying stones that weighed thousands of tons, Solomon watched them. The mighty demons sweated and toiled, humiliated by their servitude to a creature of clay, yet absolutely terrified of the divine retribution that awaited any act of defiance. It was an industrial revolution fueled not by steam or coal, but by captive, supernatural fire. To fuel this unprecedented era of monumental construction, the Creator granted Solomon a physical miracle that remains unique in the history of the world. And we caused a fount of molten copper to flow for him. Deep within the earth, a geological anomaly was born by divine decree. A spring erupted, but it did not pour forth water. It gushed a continuous, roaring river of liquid, boiling, molten copper. The heat of this metallic river was apocalyptic, illuminating the landscape with an eerie orange glow. This was the ultimate industrial resource, provided without the need for mining, smelting, or the thousands of furnaces that would normally be required. The Jinn, whose own nature of fire allowed them to withstand unimaginable temperatures, worked the banks of this molten river. They channeled the liquid copper like water, casting it into massive gates, impenetrable armor, and the colossal pillars of the sanctuary. The kingdom of Solomon was literally forged in a river of liquid fire. But the king's ambition to harness the unseen world did not stop at the surface of the earth. The dominion of Solomon extended into the crushing, lightless abyss of the oceans. He commanded the second legion of the Jinn, the divers, Algawas. For thousands of years, the bottom of the ocean has been a forbidden zone for humanity. The crushing atmospheric pressure, the freezing temperatures, and the absolute terrifying darkness make it a realm of death for creatures of flesh and bone. But the Jinn are not made of flesh. Solomon dispatched legions of demons into the deepest, most treacherous oceanic trenches on earth. They plunged into the black waters, descending miles beneath the surface, moving through the aquatic abyss with the same ease they moved through the air. Their mission was to harvest the hidden treasures of the deep. They scoured the ocean floors, retrieving pearls the size of human fists, flawless and radiant. They mined red rubies, sapphires, and precious corals that had never seen the light of the sun. They retrieved the sunken wealth of forgotten ancient civilizations that had been swallowed by the waves millennia before. When these diving demons broke the surface, they carried unimaginable fortunes, dumping mountains of flawless jewels at the feet of the king. The economy of Solomon's kingdom was not merely supported by taxation or agriculture. It was infinitely enriched by the untouched, unmeasured wealth of the oceanic abyss. Yet even with this absolute, terrifying control, the nature of the Shayatin is inherently rebellious. They are entities of chaos, and submission is a violent contradiction to their fiery existence. There were those among the Jinn who plotted, who whispered mutiny in the dark corners of the quarries, and who attempted to shirk their duties. For these malevolent entities, Solomon possessed a chilling solution. He was granted the authority to bind the rebellious demons in heavy, restrictive shackles, al-Mukaranin fi al-Asfad. These chains were not made of ordinary iron. They were spiritual and physical bindings that paralyzed the demons, trapping them in a state of agonizing confinement. They were chained together, cast into the dark dungeons of the earth or thrown into the depths of the sea, serving as a terrifying warning to the rest of the unseen workforce. The message was absolute. In the kingdom of Solomon, there is no escape, no rebellion, and no mercy for the wicked. The Creator's justice will be enforced, even upon the demons of the fire. The sheer, cinematic scale of Solomon's court at the height of his power is almost impossible for the human mind to fully visualize. Imagine the great assembly. At the center sat the prophet king on an intricate throne of ivory and gold, shaded by a synchronized canopy of thousands of living birds. To his right sat the scholars, the prophets, and the human nobility, draped in fine silks. To his left sat the commanders of his invincible army. And standing in the perimeter, forming a massive, terrifying wall around the court, were the towering, chained figures of the Jinn and the Shayatin, their heads bowed in absolute submission. Lions lay peacefully next to lambs, the wind waited silently for the king's command, and the demons of the abyss trembled before a man of clay. It was a kingdom of perfect, terrifying harmony. It was a glimpse of the ultimate order of the universe, a living, breathing demonstration that everything in existence, from the deepest ocean trench to the highest cloud, from the beasts of the field to the demons of the unseen, is entirely subservient to the will of the Creator. Solomon had achieved the impossible. He had built the empire he prayed for. But as the king sat upon his throne, surveying a world that completely obeyed his commands, a small, seemingly insignificant bird was flying frantically across the scorching deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. It was a Hoopoe, the Hudhud, Solomon's premier aerial scout. The bird had strayed far from the borders of the kingdom and had stumbled upon a civilization that did not answer to the king of Israel. It was a wealthy, powerful nation, ruled not by a king, but by a queen of astonishing intellect and power. A queen who possessed a magnificent throne of her own, but whose people bowed in worship not to the Creator, but to the blazing, indifferent sphere of the sun. The Hoopoe raced back toward the capital, carrying a report that would initiate the greatest diplomatic and supernatural clash in ancient history. The mastery of the wind and the enslavement of the Jinn were about to be used not for conquest, but for the ultimate conquest of the heart. The story of the Queen of Sheba was about to begin. The court of King Solomon was a flawless, terrifying mechanism of divine order. Every human soldier, every beast of the field, every bird in the sky, and every demon of the unseen world knew their exact place and their exact duty. Nothing moved without the king's permission. Nothing breathed without his knowledge. To stand before Solomon was to stand before the absolute apex of worldly power. But the universe is vast, and the Creator's tests often come from the most unexpected, seemingly insignificant sources. The catalyst for the greatest clash of empires in ancient history did not come from a rival warlord or a massive invading army. It came from a single fragile bird. Solomon was inspecting his troops. He reviewed the ranks of men, the chained lines of the supernatural Jinn, and he turned his gaze upward to inspect the vast canopy of birds that provided shade for his colossal army. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, scanned the intricate formations of eagles, hawks, and falcons. But he noticed a microscopic flaw in the perfect order. A single scout was missing. It was the Hoopoe, the Hudhud, a small bird with a distinctive, crowned crest, known for its ability to detect hidden underground water sources. In the kingdom of Solomon, absence without leave was not a minor infraction. It was a breach of the divine order. The king's voice echoed with absolute authority. "Why do I not see the Hoopoe? Or is he among the absent? I will surely punish him with a severe punishment or slaughter him unless he brings me clear authorization." The tension in the court was palpable. The air grew still. The beasts and the demons watched in silent terror, knowing that the wrath of the king was inescapable. But suddenly the flutter of wings broke the silence. The Hoopoe descended from the sky, exhausted but carrying a demeanor of astonishing confidence. It did not cower before the greatest king on earth. It landed before Solomon, looked him in the eye, and delivered a report that shattered the illusion of absolute human omniscience. "I have encompassed in knowledge that which you have not encompassed," the bird declared to the master of the wind and the Jinn. "And I have come to you from Sheba with certain news." Imagine the sheer audacity of this moment. A bird telling the wisest man on earth that there was a blind spot in his empire. The Hoopoe described a wealthy, flourishing civilization located far to the south, in the lush, spice-rich lands of Yemen. It was the kingdom of Sheba. But what shocked Solomon was not the existence of another wealthy nation. It was the leadership and the theology of this empire. The bird reported, "Indeed, I found a woman ruling them, and she has been given of all things, and she has a great throne. I found her and her people prostrating to the sun instead of God. A queen of immense intellect and wealth, commanding a geopolitical superpower, yet spiritually lost in the darkness of paganism, bowing to a burning star instead of the creator of the stars." Solomon, driven by his divine mandate to establish absolute justice and monotheism, could not allow this spiritual corruption to continue. However, he did not react like a typical ancient warlord. He did not immediately mobilize his heavy cavalry or command his legions of demons to burn Sheba to the ground. He tested the truth of the intelligence. Solomon wrote a letter. He did not write a long, boasting scroll detailing his armies or his wealth. He wrote a masterpiece of psychological dominance and divine authority, perfectly concise and terrifyingly clear. He sealed it, handed it to the Hoopoe, and commanded the bird to drop it directly into the lap of the Queen of Sheba. Hundreds of miles away, Queen Bilqis sat in her magnificent court, surrounded by her seasoned generals and wise counselors. She was a woman of extraordinary political acumen, surviving and thriving in a brutal, male-dominated ancient world. Suddenly, a letter fluttered down from the ceiling. She opened it and read the words that would change her destiny. Indeed, it is from Solomon, and indeed it reads, "In the name of God, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful. Be not haughty with me, but come to me in submission." It was an ultimatum. But Bilqis did not panic. She turned to her council of warlords and asked for their advice. The generals, blinded by their own earthly strength and the sheer size of their armies, puffed out their chests. "We are men of strength and of great military might," they boasted. "But the command is yours, so consider what you will command." They were ready for blood. They were ready for war. But Bilqis possessed a wisdom that her generals lacked. She understood the true nature of conflict. She knew that when powerful kings invade a city, they ruin it and humiliate its most honorable people. She suspected that Solomon was not an ordinary king looking for gold or territory. To test his true intentions, she chose diplomacy over destruction. She organized a massive, staggering caravan of unparalleled wealth, chests of gold, flawless jewels, rare spices, and exotic treasures, and sent her elite envoys to deliver it to Solomon. If he was a mere tyrant, he would take the bribe and leave them alone. If he was a prophet, the gold would mean absolutely nothing to him. Weeks later, the envoys of Sheba arrived at the borders of Solomon's kingdom. As they marched toward the capital, their arrogant confidence completely evaporated. They realized they were not entering an ordinary empire. The roads were paved with precious stones that made their gold look like cheap clay. They saw beasts of prey walking peacefully alongside humans. They saw shadows moving in the corners of their vision, the Jinn performing miraculous feats of engineering. By the time they reached Solomon's court, their massive caravan of treasure felt like an insult. When they presented the gifts, Solomon did not even look at the gold. He looked at the envoys with a mix of pity and absolute authority. He laughed. "Do you provide me with wealth? But what God has given me is better than what he has given you. Rather, it is you who rejoice in your gift." He rejected the bribe with terrifying finality. He commanded the envoys to return to their queen with a chilling warning. He promised to send an army against Sheba that they could never withstand, an army that would expel them from their lands in utter humiliation. The envoys fled, rushing back to Yemen to tell their queen that resistance was futile. Bilqis, recognizing the inevitable, gathered her royal retinue and began the long journey toward Jerusalem. She was coming in submission. But Solomon wanted to prepare a psychological and spiritual shockwave for her arrival. He wanted to demonstrate that his power was not bound by the physical laws of the universe. He wanted to completely shatter her reliance on the material world so that her heart would be open to the unseen reality of the Creator. He gathered his inner circle, the scholars, the prophets, the military commanders, and the towering, terrifying commanders of the Jinn. He issued a challenge that defied the very fabric of reality. "O assembly," he asked, "which of you will bring me her throne before they come to me in submission?" The throne of Bilqis was legendary. It was an enormous, heavy structure made of solid gold, encrusted with rare jewels, heavily guarded, and locked deep within her palace hundreds of miles away. Moving it by normal means would require an entire army and months of travel. A massive, terrifying entity stepped forward. It was an Ifrit, one of the most powerful, malevolent, and physically imposing of the Jinn. Its voice rumbled like a localized earthquake. "I will bring it to you before you rise from your place," the demon growled. "And indeed, I am for this task strong and trustworthy." The Ifrit was offering to travel hundreds of miles, break into a heavily guarded fortress, carry a multi-ton golden throne and return, all within the span of a few hours, the duration of the king's morning court session. It was a terrifying display of supernatural speed and physical demonic power. But Solomon remained silent. He was not satisfied. He wanted something faster. He wanted a miracle that demonstrated the supremacy of divine knowledge over raw demonic strength. Then a human being stepped forward. The ancient texts describe him only as one who had knowledge from the scripture. He was not a demon. He was not a warrior. He was a scholar, a man deeply connected to the divine names and the hidden architecture of the universe. He looked calmly at the king and made a statement that defies the boundaries of modern quantum physics. "I will bring it to you before your glance returns to you, before the blink of an eye, before a single microsecond could pass." Solomon did not even have time to nod. He simply blinked. And when his eyes opened, the massive, jewel-encrusted, multi-ton throne of the Queen of Sheba was sitting perfectly still, resting solidly on the marble floor directly in front of him, exactly as it had sat in Yemen a fraction of a second prior. It had not flown through the air, it had been instantly displaced across space and time. Any other king would have leapt from his seat, shouting in triumph, declaring himself a god of space and time. But Solomon, witnessing a miracle that shatters the human mind, immediately lowered his head. His words echo through eternity as the ultimate expression of power and humility. "This is from the favor of my Lord, to test me whether I will be grateful or ungrateful. And whoever is grateful, his gratitude is for the benefit of himself. And whoever is ungrateful, then indeed, my Lord is free of need and generous." He ordered his servants to disguise the throne, altering its jewels and its appearance slightly, to test the intellect and perception of the queen when she arrived. But the teleporting throne was only the first half of his psychological masterpiece. Solomon had commanded the Jinn to construct a reception hall unlike anything ever built in human history. It was a palace known as the Sar. The Jinn had diverted a flowing river, filled with swimming fish and clear, rushing water. Over this river they had laid a floor made of pure, perfectly transparent crystal glass. It was so flawless, so masterfully engineered, that the glass was entirely invisible. It looked exactly like a deep, rushing pool of water right in the middle of the throne room. Days later, Queen Bilqis arrived. She was exhausted, humbled, but still possessing her sharp royal intellect. She was brought before Solomon. He pointed to the massive golden structure in the room and asked, "Is your throne like this?" Bilqis looked at it. She was thousands of miles from home. It was logically impossible for her throne to be here. Yet, every contour, every jewel, and every measurement was identical. She answered with brilliant political caution, neither confirming nor denying the impossible. "It is as if it were the same." Solomon recognized her brilliance. But it was time for the final lesson. She was invited to enter the great palace to approach the king. As Bilqis stepped toward the center of the hall, she looked down and saw the rushing water and the fish swimming beneath her feet. Believing she was about to step into a deep pool, the great Queen of Sheba instinctively reached down and lifted her royal skirts to bare her calves, preparing to wade through the water. Solomon, sitting high on his throne, watched the illusion take hold. With a gentle voice, he shattered her perception of reality. "Indeed," he said, "it is a palace smoothed with glass." Bilqis froze. She slowly lowered her foot onto the invisible crystal floor. It was solid. It was perfect. In that single, breathtaking moment, her entire worldview collapsed. Everything she thought she understood about the world, about power, about architecture, and about reality itself, had been an illusion. She realized that just as she had been fooled into thinking the solid glass was water, she had been fooled her entire life into thinking the burning sun was God. She had been worshipping the creation instead of the Creator. The psychological fortress of the queen was breached, not by swords or catapults, but by an overwhelming demonstration of divine truth. She fell to her knees, looking at the crystal floor, the teleported throne, and the humble, all-powerful king. Her words of submission were not spoken to Solomon, but to the Almighty. "My Lord, indeed I have wronged myself, and I submit with Solomon to God, the Lord of the worlds." The Queen of Sheba had been conquered, but her dignity was intact. She gained a kingdom eternal, stepping out of the shadows of paganism and into the blinding light of the true faith. The empire of Solomon had reached its absolute zenith. He had united the human and the unseen worlds, commanded the elements, and brought the greatest empires to submission. But the clock of human existence is unforgiving. Every king, no matter how powerful, must eventually face the one entity that cannot be chained, cannot be bribed, and cannot be commanded. The angel of death was approaching the court of Solomon. The empire of Solomon had reached a zenith that defied human imagination. He commanded the wind, communicated with the beasts of the earth, and shackled the powerful demons of the smokeless fire. Yet, the architecture of the universe is built upon an inescapable truth. Every empire, no matter how magnificent, must eventually end. Solomon, possessing an intellect illuminated by divine revelation, knew that his time in this temporary realm was drawing to a close. He also understood the fragile nature of his kingdom. The Jinn were not his willing servants, they were a captive labor force bound by terror. If they knew his soul had departed, they would abandon the monumental construction of the great sanctuary in Jerusalem and unleash chaos upon the earth. Furthermore, a dangerous theological poison had begun to spread among the human population. Because the Jinn possessed supernatural abilities, Many humans falsely believe these demons possessed the knowledge of Al-Gaib, the unseen. Solomon knew this dangerous illusion had to be shattered perfectly and permanently before he left the world. The stage was set for his final, most profound miracle. It was not a miracle of roaring winds, but of absolute, terrifying stillness. As the construction of the sanctuary reached its critical phase, Solomon retreated to his private prayer niche, an elevated pavilion of polished glass overlooking the valley where tens of thousands of shackled demons toiled. He grasped his heavy wooden staff, leaned heavily upon it, and bowed his head in prayer. It was in this state of quiet devotion that the angel of death arrived. The king of Israel simply submitted his soul to the Creator. But by a profound divine decree, Solomon's lifeless body did not fall. It remained rigidly locked in place, balanced flawlessly upon his wooden staff. His posture remained commanding, his silhouette clearly visible through the transparent walls of his glass sanctuary. Down in the valleys, the grueling labor continued. The Jinn, covered in the soot of the furnaces, occasionally dared to glance upward. They saw the king. They saw his imposing figure standing there, day and night, watching them with an unmoving, terrifying vigilance. Driven by the paralyzing fear of his gaze, the demons worked harder. They hoisted heavy stones into place and cast the boiling copper. Months passed. The seasons changed. The howling winds of autumn gave way to the freezing rains of winter, and still the king stood in his glass tower. The Jinn, bound by their heavy chains, pushed themselves to the absolute limits of their supernatural endurance. They were completely, utterly fooled by a physical shell. This was the ultimate humiliation of the unseen world. Here were the most arrogant entities in creation, toiling in agonizing slavery, terrified of a man who had been dead for months. To shatter the illusion of the greatest empire in history, the Creator did not send a devastating earthquake. To bring down the king of the earth, God sent the humblest creature imaginable, a tiny termite. Invisible to the demons below, the small insect crawled up the base of Solomon's wooden staff. Driven by divine instinct, it began to eat. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, the termite hollowed out the core of the wood that held the weight of the dead king. Finally, the hollowed-out wood could no longer support the body. With a sharp crack that echoed through the silent pavilion, the staff snapped. The body of the prophet king plummeted to the marble floor. The Jinn, startled by the noise, looked up. The commanding silhouette was gone. When they cautiously investigated the glass tower, they saw the fallen king, the broken staff, and the tiny termite crawling away. In that single breathtaking instant, the devastating truth crashed down upon them. As the sacred text reveals, if they had truly known the unseen, they would not have remained in humiliating punishment. Their arrogance was shattered. Their claim to knowing the hidden realities of the universe was exposed as a pathetic fraud. They were not all-knowing gods. They were blind servants, easily fooled by a dead man and defeated by a microscopic worm. The chains of illusion were instantly broken, and the Jinn scattered into the shadows, never to be harnessed by a human being again. The epic saga of King Solomon is the ultimate parable of power and reality. It teaches us that no matter how much wealth we hoard or how advanced our technology becomes, worldly power is a fleeting shadow. Everything perishes. Everything crumbles. The only thing that remains eternal, unbroken, and absolute, is the Lord of the seen and the unseen.